Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Eve. So today's Daily Run started out pretty interesting, and I would say in most cases, when you find the D4 in the very first treasure room, that's gonna be an indication that maybe you should pick it up and just start re-rolling as soon as possible. It's just one of those items that's gonna win the run on its own. It's like finding Mom's knife, even though I would say maybe it's a little bit less involved than that, and already Mom's knife is, I would say, not a very involved item in the first place. It's just one of those items as soon as you get a few battery charges, or a few re-rolls, or just a few items that you actually pick up as passive items, you're gonna get a run that's gonna be extremely strong and you're gonna kind of go and cruise to the rest of the game. Obviously it does depend, sometimes you can still get a little bit unlucky, but in the majority of cases I would just say always pick this item up because it's gonna win you the run on its own. Well, because of that and because of how strong it is and because I feel like it takes a little bit of the identity out of the run, essentially the items that you find throughout the run aren't gonna be really important because you're gonna reroll them eventually, and depending on how many items you pick up or maybe from which pool those items are, you can actually end up with a completely different run and a different combination of items depending on just when you use the D4 in the first place. And just because of that, I tend to ignore it because I feel like when I usually play dailies, it's for the discussion, right? So we can talk about it, so maybe we can discuss certain things. And that's not to say that maybe D4 isn't strategic in some regard, but obviously, like I said, I think it does take the identity out of the part, and I just usually ignore it. And that's what I intended to do today as well. I just wanted to go buy it, I didn't want to pick it up in the first place, but then something happened. In the very first boss room, there was Dragman, and that would be that big of a deal where Eve, we can kind of handle him pretty easily, but for some reason he had 7 little spiders around him, and I'm not sure if I ever saw that particular rune combination. I mean, I must have, I've played this game so many times, but I just can't recall it. It was just extremely difficult to navigate without actually getting hit, and I was still 2 red health, full red health. I did pick up a small rock, so I was a bit slower than usual, and I wasn't in my Horo Babylon transformation, but what ended up happening there is I got hit by one of the spiders, and obviously that's a bummer, and as soon as that happened, I actually used the razor blade because I figured I'm gonna need a little bit more damage and my angry bird, so I can, not angry bird, dead bird, so I can actually get rid of the little spiders and then focus on Ragman. It was just one of those things which I feel like was a bit unfair. I'm not saying that you can't go by that route by not taking damage, but having only 2 red health is, I would say, pushing it, and especially after you use the razor blade, you essentially only have 1 red health to deal with, so it's just a very hard boss fight. Well, because of that, I saw that the run had no respect for me, and I'm sad, well, if the run won't have any respect for me, I'm not gonna have any respect for the run. So I went right back, I picked up the D4, and this is where we stand. So now I'm just buying all kinds of items, I'm basically picking up any passive item that I can find. So eventually, as I start rerolling, of course, I hope that I'm gonna get a good run. And this is, of course, something that happens, that did happen in this particular run, but it happens just in every case, I would say. Maybe there's like one instance where I tried to reroll with the D4 and it just ended up giving me a lot of bad item combinations, but even with that, you know, eventually you're gonna get something good, or at least I would say something usable, if not maybe good. So in this case, I think I finished up with Epic Fetus. Some, of course, non-transformation like Beelzebub, so I was able to fly, also Conjoined, so I actually had 3 rockets, and along with Epic Fetus I also had Pyromaniac. So that's the run I decided to stop in, not only because you basically have infinite health with that combo, but also because I thought if there was gonna be a sacrifice room on one of the later floors, I can of course use it, heal myself back up again every time I use it, and then kind of teleport onwards. The fact is also every time you use D4, because there's so many items which actually give HP, you're gonna be left with, like in this case, 12 red health, obviously. And when you reroll some of those health upgrade items away, you actually remain with the health, but you get a different item in return. And this is the same as it works with practically any item that gives you any stats, not stats, but any consumables or health containers. You actually remain with the consumables and with the health containers, but you still have the benefit of actually rolling into another item. So using the D4 is not only good because you're gonna get a good strong run eventually, but also because it's a very good way to actually capitalize on swag. You get something like Skeleton Key, you get 99 keys, and then you can reroll it into something completely different. And that's I would say the benefit of just having this combo and just allowing it to really kind of spiral out of control. So as I said, we did get that Epic Fetus. We had Conjoined, so we were actually doing quite a lot of damage, and obviously every time you can get any little damage upgrade with Epic Fetus, it's gonna matter a lot, so in this case I pick up the Mark, and while it might not seem like a lot with 0.8 damage, first of all you have to remember that Epic Fetus shots scale like like 5 times your base damage, plus of course because we're shooting 3 rockets, that means every time we shoot, that damage is also getting multiplied by 3. So regardless if there's a damage upgrade, if it's a big one or if it's a small one, with Epic Fetus you want to pick it up. And at this point I wasn't too concerned about my item penalty because I picked up so many items in the first place, and I just figured maybe I'm gonna have a fun run. And maybe what cemented my decision with sticking on this run is that the end of the floor actually had a blank card after the boss room, and I think I had chaos and that's why it dropped, and it's just one of those things which I would say are a very lucky fortune, which I wasn't really able to capitalize on. I didn't get any good cards. I think the only one I got was Death, so even something like a Justice card would have been great. Obviously Yara would be ideal, or maybe even an AWAS rune just to get a little bit further, but I wasn't too concerned. We got the blank card and I figured, you know, if it actually gets on it we can make it work, but even if we don't, at least we still have a really powerful run on our hands. So as we were going through these later floors, obviously the only thing I'm looking out for is the Sacrifice room. I want to play it, I have so much health, I can then of course heal myself get back up again, like I said before, so I don't really have to rely on worry about anything. And hopefully, you know, when we get to the dark room, if we do get to the dark room, we're gonna be strong enough so that we're actually able to explore the entirety of it without getting hit too much. And I feel like when you have 3 rockets, and even though it's only 5 damage, you're pretty much able to one-shot most bosses, at least some of those which have maybe a little bit less HP. Sure, it's maybe not as effective against things like Mom's Heart, but those are just naturally tankier, I would say, to some extent, so you really can't expect much. Also, another thing that worked really well here is that I think we had butt bombs, and so every explosion that we spawn also deals damage to every single enemy in the room, so we didn't even need the death card because we already had like a passive death card on the rockets, so that worked out pretty well as well. And of course it was very effective at just killing some of those smaller enemies which usually have trouble dealing with Epic Fetus, like the enemies which split into more smaller enemies because the explosion is very localized, if that makes sense. Having a way to deal damage to every single enemy in the room kinda, I would say, maximizes that opportunity. So we did go here to the arcade, we got the IV bag eventually, and of course I was able to use my healing powers to heal myself up when I was playing the IV bag to get a lot more coins, and didn't really show it because it's pretty straightforward. I picked up like 2,000 or 3,000 points in total, like coins, which gave me 3,000 points in total, and I ended up finishing in like the top 15 score in the end. Obviously not an ideal run, but I felt like I played pretty well with not too high of a damage penalty. I didn't explore as much, maybe because I was rushing a little bit. Of course I did try to make the D4 play work, but besides that, it was just a very decent run, very enjoyable. And at a certain point, you know, it's always nice when you show the run who's boss, and I feel like we did that in this one. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.